How to make a good impression at work here in Japan. Let's go get to it, guys. So what we want to do in this video is talk about what it takes to make a good impression at work here in Japan. Now, wherever you come from, it's likely that you'll experience significant cultural differences in the Japanese workplace. But in this video, we want to look at those things that are perhaps slightly more nuanced, as well as those things that have become so obvious that in the excitement of being in Japan, we sort of forget that they somehow apply to us. So let's get into it. Point number one, come bearing gifts. What do we mean by this? We're talking about the custom of giving and receiving omiyage in Japan. Omiyage means like souvenirs, basically. And the custom of giving and receiving this is pretty much prevalent not only in working life in Japan, but daily life in general. So when people go away on a business trip, or if they go away on holiday, for leisure, pretty much typically they'll bring back some omiyage with them to give to their colleagues and to their friends. Now, generally it's something consumable, like a box of cookies, chocolates, maybe a box of senbei, those rice crackers that you see around here. And people are spending, from say 500 yen to, 1,500 yen, depending on the amount of people that they need to give their omiyage to. My advice is, if you're coming straight from your native country to Japan and you're jumping straight into work, bring something from back home. That'll be appreciated. It'll be something a bit different for people to experience, but also make sure that it's something consumable, something that people can eat and they don't have to live with it on their desks for the years to come. When I first turned up at this job, I presented my boss, I come from the UK, I presented him with a Union Jack emblazoned ashtray and pen, and he looked at me like I was a right weirdo, like what the hell am I supposed to do with this for the next few months? Lesson learned, make your omiyage consumable. Next up, watch your appearance. Particularly guys, in the case of beards, keep them clean shaved, keep the styles fairly traditional. For whatever reason, beards are still not that popular in Japan, so just keep them presentable if you must. Also tattoos. Tattoos remain still slightly taboo in this country. Even though it's becoming more internationalized and tattoos are more prevalent than ever, it's still probably not a good idea to rock into work showing off your ink. Keep them covered up as much as possible, at least in the early stages of your working life here in Japan. For your first week at work, my advice, particularly if you're working in an office environment like this, for your first week, come in fully suited and booted. And then after that first week, you can judge the situation, see what your colleagues around you are wearing, and adjust accordingly from there. Staying on the matter of wearing suits at work, last year, the issue of companies enforcing women to wear high-heeled shoes in the workplace really hit the headlines on the back of this hashtag #Kutsu movement. Ku coming from the Japanese word for shoes, meaning kutsu, and the Japanese word for pain, kutsu. Now, this #Kutsu movement saw groups of women come together to sign petitions to present to the government, demanding that it was wrong for companies to enforce them to wear high-heeled shoes in the workplace. Remember names. Oh my God, I'm terrible at remembering names, even back in my home country. And it's even harder in Japan, where the names, even after years in country, the names still don't kind of register in the same way that the names of people back home might do. However, a point about this, it is okay to inquire about the pronunciation of somebody's name as a way to kind of get them to say it again once you've forgotten it. Another thing to be aware of in Japan, which can exacerbate the situation of forgetting somebody's name, is the way that they converse over here. And they launch into sentences typically omitting the subject of that sentence because it's implied by context. Now, this is a nightmare for the native English speaker because generally, almost always, we start a sentence launching into the subject first. Now, if you've forgotten somebody's name, you're then reduced to referring to them as you, which is as bad, if not worse, in Japan as it might be back home. So the result of this is that, well, without the subject, without somebody's name, you just end up not talking to them, which is no way to make a good impression at work here in Japan. Also, another thing that you might want to be aware of is business cards. Now, even in 2020 international Japan, it's not uncommon to receive a business card from somebody where their name is written in kanji, those Chinese characters, where their name is written in kanji only. There's no Roman alphabet on there. So they tell you your name, you forget it, but you think, oh, it's okay, I'll just check their business card afterwards. And there it is, written in kanji, and you can't read it. Now, during a meeting in Japan where you've been receiving business cards, you typically kind of line up the business cards on your desk in front of you to represent the position of the people sitting around you. It's okay during a meeting to quietly look down at those business cards if you have forgotten people's names. It's okay to do that just to give them a quick check. So go ahead and do that if you have forgotten people's names, or just don't do it if in fact what you actually want to do is just pass through the meeting without having to say anything. Next up, leave the jokes at home, at least for a little while. Now, what I'm talking about here is, back home for me, the use of sarcasm, irony, kind of dry wit. These are important tools when it comes to telling jokes. But here in Japan, you might not get the reaction that you expect. So for example, if you rock up in Japan, go straight into your first job, not knowing any Japanese, but then the boss chucks you into a meeting that's totally done in Japanese, you come out, your colleagues ask you how it went, you go, oh yeah, it was fine, I totally understood everything. Back home, that might get a couple of chuckles of approval for your use of sarcasm. Here in Japan, it might seem to be taken literally, or it might just be met with like a dead awkward silence. Now, this is not to say that your Japanese colleagues lack a sense of humor or that they didn't get the joke. It could be that they're just kind of judging the distance between themselves and you. It's early days yet. They don't want to encroach onto your space. They want to give you room to breathe. They want to give themselves the room to breathe as they slowly settle into this relationship. It could also be that, yes, they simply don't understand the humor. So the best thing to do, just keep it cool, leave the humor at home for a little while until you get settled in to working life in Japan. Know your boundaries. These are just some basic points of etiquette that you should be aware of when you're working in Japan. They might apply to other countries as well, but particularly here in Japan, know your boundaries, observe these points of etiquette. No hitting on anybody at work, at least for a few months anyway. It's just not cool. Even if you are genuinely attracted to somebody in your workplace, you'll often find that Japanese people, couples who meet in the workplace, they keep it quiet for an extraordinary amount of time before they eventually announce that they are in fact a couple. So don't come rocking up to work trying to get phone numbers as soon as you hit the ground running. No drinking booze at lunch. Now, back home when I was working in sales, if we'd had a good week, on a Friday afternoon, the boss would take us out to the pub for a lunch and a pint. The result was we'd come back into the office, be half asleep and not be able to make any sales. Now, I don't know exactly what's going on back home in terms of drinking at lunch these days, but here in Japan, you don't drink at lunch. It's as simple as that. On a similar note, no bragging about how hungover you are. Yeah, I went out last night, drank 12 pints, now here I'm in the office, but I'm still doing my job. Just don't do it. It's not that the Japanese don't drink. In fact, drinking is almost, quite an important aspect of working life in Japan. Post-work drinks with the boss and all that sort of thing. But for whatever reason, the Japanese never seem to be hungover. And if they are, they do an amazing job of disguising it, and they never talk about it. Particularly if you're new to your job, greet everybody within earshot when you walk into your place of work in the morning with a nice big bold "Ohayou gozaimasu." That means good morning. Do the same thing when you leave. "Osaki ni shirei shimasu," which means something like "I'm leaving now. Sorry for doing that." as you get settled into the working environment, you'll find out that there are those people who don't bother greeting anybody. You might find that you're the kind of person that just can't bear to look anybody in the face when you first arrive at the office in the morning. Okay, so this next point might seem a little bit controversial. As a foreigner working in Japan, you might get the sense that your Japanese colleagues, bosses, employers have almost got this kind of like a la carte approach to your being foreign. Now what I mean by that is it could seem that like they want only certain aspects of your foreignness and they're not willing to accept the whole package. So to give you an example, I'm somebody who would typically celebrate Christmas. In fact, I loved Christmas as a child. Here in Japan, Christmas really isn't that much of a big deal, okay? It's a commercial sort of dating opportunity, but the real sort of spirit, the soul of it is not there. And what you'll find is that actually most people are working on Christmas Day. Now this can then come as a shock as a Christmas celebrating expat working in Japan that, oh my God, I've got to work on Christmas Day, you heathens, what's going on here? You can have this kind of reaction, and this is what I mean by almost feeling like, okay, so my bosses wanted me for this aspect of being foreign, but they're not willing to accept the fact that I like Christmas and normally I'd have Christmas Day off. You've got to be careful about this. You've got to sort of almost guard yourself against this kind of thinking because it can lead to, you know, feeling homesick, feeling like your Japanese colleagues are somehow cold. That's not necessarily the case. In fact, quite the opposite. One thing that it might be relating to is that they don't want to get too personal. They don't want to get too, they don't want to invade into your privacy. They're reluctant to ask you about certain aspects of your culture, lest they feel like they're crossing a boundary that they shouldn't. Last but not least, in fact, most importantly probably, do your job. This sounds completely obvious. But what I'm referring to here is those foreigners, and there are some out there I think, that come to Japan because they wanted to enjoy Japan. And when they get here, they find that they're quite shocked actually that their bosses are expecting them to do a full-time job, to turn up on time, to be professional, to put the hours in, to do their best. It's almost like, well, I came here to sort of party and rock around Japan, not to do a job. The job is just a kind of side effect that enables me to be here. For your employers, for your Japanese colleagues, for your bosses, that's not the case. They've brought you over here because they want you to do a job. It's also the case that when you turn up in Japan from another country, or if you turn up to a foreign country to work, it's obviously quite an overwhelming situation, at least for some people. You know, they get here, everything's totally different, they're nervous. You know, starting a new job is hard enough at the best of times, but starting it in a new country, well, that can be even worse. And such is the case then that it leaves people thinking, oh my God, I can't do this, and they're ready to jump on the next plane back home. Stick it out, particularly in Japan. Japan's a wonderful place to work. You're going to meet some great people, experience some great things, maybe get some new skills, learn the language. It's a great opportunity. It might be tough in the first few weeks, but stick it out, give it your best, and hopefully it's all going to work out. So those are some points that I'm sure are going to help you to make a good impression at work here in Japan. If you've got some recommendations yourself, definitely leave those in the comments. For more information about working in Japan, we've got some great articles about this sort of stuff. I'll leave the links in the description below. Definitely head over to CityCost where you can find more information about life in general as a foreigner in Japan. And also subscribe to the channel. See you next time.